Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I think I will have to be as fast as those data warehouses today with my presentation. So I will try to go through mine quickly. Let's start with what I want to talk about today. The topic of this presentation is from reports to forecasts, but in reality, we won't have reports without data. So I want to talk a bit about the role of data in an organization. Later, I will move on to the challenges related to data consumption that we most frequently encounter with our clients. Then I will quickly talk a bit about what BI tools are, what they offer us, and which ones are most commonly found among our clients. And at the end, I'll also talk a little about the use of all these abbreviations, and there will be a nice demo at the end. So I recommend staying. The role of data in an organization. I've actually divided this into 3 elements. So we start with the fact that as we grow, when we establish an organization, we always begin with the need for data for operational purposes. We want to know how much we sold, for how much we sold it, how much we bought it for, and whether our investment is paying off or not. So that's operational reporting. Then, a natural consequence of this is that as we collect historical data, we have descriptive analytics, meaning, for example, we can analyze this historical data, verify whether we have declining or rising trends, whether our sales are increasing or decreasing, and in which direction it is moving. And a natural consequence of having this data is diagnostic analytics, which is about understanding why something happened, because just knowing that our users are leaving our services is not enough. We often want to know why they are leaving. The next step, which is also somewhat natural, is preparing forecasts and recommendations. And here, again, they are only possible when the first part is fulfilled. So, in reality, we will only have good forecasts when we have good data, because there is a fairly common saying in analytics, and I think there are probably other industries where it's used as well, which is garbage in, garbage out. So if we input some poor data at the beginning, we will also have poor results. When it comes to the forecasting and recommendation part, we can talk about simple predictions, whether it's demand, or for example, user churn from our services. Then we have prescriptive analytics, which is the kind that gives us recommendations based on these forecasts. Let's say we have a user who wants to leave us. Well, they might want to leave for various reasons. If we have a streaming platform like Netflix or others that simply provide movies through a subscription service, it might be that the user wants to leave us because for example, we are too expensive. And the way to address this, the recommendation we can derive from such a forecast is simply to offer our services at a lower price over a longer period. And we might have a user who wants to cancel because there are no interesting offers for them. We don't have films that meet their expectations. And the recommendation for such a user would be, for example, an additional purchase of a pay-per-view film, a specific product, right? So here, the recommendations differ slightly depending on why the user wants to leave us. And the last element of forecasts and recommendations is personalization. Well, personalization, for example, user experience on the site, right? Or recommendations of specific products related to what the user has watched so far. The next natural aspect is AI automation. And this is the highest level of data utilization in our company, where we already automate certain processes based on this data, implement intelligent assistants, and when it comes to process automation, these are, for example, scoring models or fraud detection. Fraud detection in various dimensions, because we can talk, for example, about fraud detection in the context of what what banks do, like blocking our credit card when they detect a transaction in Cyprus or elsewhere. Or simply if we have a website and some bots are generating artificial traffic on the site, we want to block them to avoid having skewed data. And intelligent assistants, also known as chatbots, they should also have they should also be based on the data from our company, in the sense of having what is called grounding, meaning domain knowledge from our organization. And for this knowledge to be good, for these models to work, we also need to have completed the first two stages. And above all, have good input data and good documentation. When it comes to challenges in data consumption, I have listed here the most commonly encountered ones. First of all, distributed data. We have data in different systems, MME. And when we want to analyze them together, it usually looks like this. We export a CSV from one system, export a CSV from another system, combine them into one Excel file, do a vertical lookup, and everything works great. But it's a bit cumbersome if we have to do it repeatedly. Since we started this conference with words about cooking, it came to my mind that it's like wanting to bake a cake and having the ingredients at home. The baking pan stored somewhere in the storage room or basement, and the recipe at grandma's. And now, to manage this, we need to call grandma, but she's hard of hearing and doesn't answer. So we have to go to her to get the recipe, and we waste a lot of time just to bake this cake. If we want to bake it once a month, we can afford that time. But if we want to bake it more often, and let's say we don't have the memory to remember the recipe permanently, it would be nice to have everything in one place. Hence the need for a data warehouse or a data lake, so that everything is in one place, integrated, and we can make use of this data. The second issue, which is somewhat related, is the lack of consistency between sources. I think most people have encountered this, as was mentioned today, where we have different values for the same KPI. They come, there's a board meeting, and suddenly it turns out that we don't really know how many products we've sold, because someone implemented a slightly different methodology for calculating the indicator than another person. And suddenly it turns out that, for example, we didn't exclude such test transactions, and it turns out we have twice as many sales. The solution to this is data reconciliation. It's quite a tedious process, but necessary if we really want to use this data, because it's hard to trust the data if we don't even know how many of those products we've actually sold. The next issue is the collection, or lack thereof, of necessary data. And this is also something we notice when working with clients, that they come to us with an idea and ask, what do you think we should actually collect in order to be able to calculate this? And that's when the part begins, where we try to support them, asking, what is this wish list? What would be nice to collect in order to be able to show it? And indeed, the solution to this problem is the support of an analyst. However, if we start collecting data only now, at this moment when we discuss it, then some time must pass before we can use it. Scalability is a term that has already been mentioned many times today, especially in the previous presentation. Here, I mean scalability in two dimensions. Firstly, as our business grows, the amount of data increases and the number of data sources also increases. And at a certain point, if we are operating on premises on our own servers, there suddenly arises a need for a significant investment to purchase new servers because our data simply no longer fits. The solution to this is the Comms Cloud, which, as we mentioned today, is more scalable, but also more scalable in another dimension. As our business grows, so do the data-related needs. And we also notice this with our clients. For example, we might be working with just one department and managing the data they have in some way. We create a dashboard from this, and That department goes to some inter-office or interdepartmental meeting. And the other departments also see that something can be done with this data and suddenly they want it too. And at this point, such an analyst, whether external or internal, suddenly becomes a bottleneck. Because instead of serving 3 or 4 people, they suddenly have to serve the entire company. And they are unable to do anything at all, while everyone wants something from them. And a good solution for this is proper data governance within the company. However, there is no single model that is simply good. It needs to be tailored to your company. And lastly, the different levels of user proficiency. We can have people who know SQL. We can have people who can write in Power Query. And then we can tailor BI tools to them. But we can also have end users who do not code, but are willing and able to use BI tools. And here it's a matter of selecting the right BI tool. And since we're on the topic of BI tools, I have a question for you. Is Excel a BI tool? Who thinks it is? Raise your hand. And who thinks it isn't? I'm just observing how many people abstained, so the majority thinks it is. All right. I don't have a definitive answer to that, because it's another thing analysts often like to say, which is it depends, because it depends on what aspect of BI tools we are considering. And since we're on the topic, I'll also try to present Excel within these different points. What should BI tools provide us with? First and foremost, they allow us to display data from various sources in one place. And it's not about building a complete integration in the BI tool with different data sources, but rather that there are certain tools that provide us with specific needs for dashboard purposes, like Google Analytics, for example. We have dashboards. We have information about the traffic on the site, how many products have been sold, and so on. However, if we wanted to somehow relate this to inventory levels and know when to place the next order for products, it becomes difficult in Google Analytics, and it's beneficial to have this data in one place, in some BI tool. Well, naturally, analysis and reporting, this is also what a BI tool is mainly used for. Semantic layer. Well, here, you can agree or disagree. Part of this semantic layer should definitely be built in the warehouse. I think if we were to talk about it, probably 80% should be in the warehouse, and the rest can be in BI. There are BI tools that provide this semantic layer, and there are those that do not. But we can always define some indicators there. Some indicators are simply easier to define directly in the tool rather than in the warehouse, because sometimes there are non-additive measures, for example, which if defined in the warehouse can only be done for specific dimensions. Otherwise, we would have to create thousands of views for each dimension to be able to display it on the dashboard. Or we can simply calculate it directly in the dashboard. What else? Access control. And that's an example of something that's hard to manage in Excel. Because once we send an Excel file out into the world, we might send it to one person, and they send it to 3 others. And those 3 send it to even more people. And in the end, we really don't know who those XLS files have reached. We don't know who has seen the data, or who has access to it. When it comes to other BI tools, most of them provide some form of access control, whether it's simply via email, meaning a specific email has access to our data, or there are options for low-level security implementation. Let's say we consist of several companies, and we don't want people from company A to have access to data from company B, but they are all in one table. We can implement RLS or row-level security, so that people from company A only see data for company A. Availability at any time. Here, what I mainly mean is that if, let's say, our president or director demands data from us for yesterday, instead of writing SQL at that moment and answering the question of what the stock sales were in the last 3 months, for example, we can look at this dashboard, filter the appropriate data, and have it actually prepared in 5 minutes, rather than worrying about forgetting some condition necessary to calculate it correctly. The next step is self-service BI, meaning that the director doesn't write to the analyst to prepare it for yesterday, but instead he can filter the data himself in this dashboard, and it's basically ready. The analyst can focus on other matters, and this is precisely the part that the end user can also partially take on themselves. Ease versus flexibility. There are tools that are easy to use, but they are also less flexible. And here I mainly mean that if someone has some demanding visualization needs, well, when it comes to visualizations in general, all dashboard tools have a similar set, because we will have line charts, bar charts, pie charts, maps. That's basically how it is in all tools. However, if we specifically want, I don't know, Nicolas Cage's face in the background, that will simply be more difficult. In some tools, we won't get that. And what BI tools really serve us for, or at least what they should serve us for, is that they make our daily work easier, because we can build our own story in them, tailored to our daily work. So we can build visualizations from start to finish that directly answer our questions. And so I look at the time, but I see that I'm already a bit behind schedule, so I'll try to go even faster. I won't go into too much detail on this, on this slide, but when it comes to the most popular BI tools, I've included Excel here. There's Looker Studio, Power BI, and Tableau, which are the ones we encounter most often. Looker itself, in its enterprise form, is rarely seen because it's really dedicated to the largest companies, and there are relatively fewer of them in the market. However, what should we consider when deciding on a tool? Well, there are the costs, right? So how much will we actually pay for this tool? Access to real-time data is essentially available in all tools. These data are as real-time as our database is, and as we set up the refresh rate possibly in the BI tool, because Looker Studio or Looker use the warehouse directly, right? Whereas Power BI or Tableau have their own databases underneath. Security. Well, here again, there are certainly sectors that need security at a higher level or don't need it at all. And this is also something worth considering. The example of row-level security is available in Power BI, Tableau, Looker, Excel, and not in Looker Studio. Connectors. And connectors meaning what we can directly connect to from our tools. And here we return to the question of whether we want to build a data warehouse in the BI tool. Because if so, these connectors are very necessary for us. And if not, then basically we only need a connector to our database, to our data warehouse. Flexibility? Well, in the context of how sophisticated we want the visualizations to be, if we really care about having, for example, a circular pie chart divided by a dashed line, then it cannot be Looker Studio. Well, here we already have limited possibilities, and the more we need such specific requirements, the more we should lean towards more expensive solutions, or even write our own application in HTML and JavaScript, because then we can do everything. Really. Code versus no code also is a difficult division in this context, because on one hand we have end users, and on the other hand, analysts who define these measures. And of course, Excel can also be code, because it also has Power Query, it also has VBA, so we can turn everything into such code. But when it comes to such an end user, basically each of these tools is drag and drop. So we can move what we want to have on the x-axis, move what we want to have on the y-axis, and what should be shown on the chart overall. And when it comes to the end user, when it comes to the analyst, when it comes to more complex measures than sum, average, and the like, well, some of these tools simply require some coding knowledge. And this part of Gen AI, which is AI-assisted BI, or it actually has many names, there's also augmented analytics, right? It's basically available everywhere now. With Looker Studio, I put a period because Looker Studio is completely free, but to use AI, Gen AI and Looker Studio, we need to purchase the Pro version, and the capabilities are quite limited there. Basically, we can converse with the data, but for example, we can produce a presentation based on our dashboards. However, we cannot build visualizations or create measures in collaboration with Gen AI. All right. Since we're already on the topic of Gen AI, let's briefly go over what is what. AI is actually the broadest field of science that deals with how to teach machines intelligent tasks. And within this, there is a subcategory, which is ML, where we talk about algorithms that learn from data. In addition, to speak more broadly, there are also expert systems, for example, which are based on expert knowledge, meaning they do not rely on data, but rather on the knowledge of experts or physical algorithms. So if we talk about robotics, then within AI, we have a part that relies on physical algorithms to ensure that robots can walk properly. They do not learn from data. They are simply algorithms based on physics. Oh, sorry, I haven't yet mentioned what's at the very core, which is Gen AI. Gen AI is a subcategory of ML which includes algorithms that generate content. They can generate text, images, videos, melodies, everything. But this is based on the data that these models were previously fed with. And why do we use it? Referring back to the first slide, we essentially use it for those two aspects. On the right side, which are forecasts and recommendations, and AI automation. We can forecast events, the probability of an event occurring, and we can forecast specific values. We can use data to perform classification or segmentation, or to detect behavior patterns. As for AI automation, as I mentioned earlier, there's credit scoring, content blocking, or automatic order placement based on data, structured and unstructured. Here, I mean using Gen AI to attempt to structure unstructured data. For example, when it comes to video, we can extract content from them and store it somewhere in a tabular form, which is much easier for an analyst to analyze. Or from documents, like invoices or CVs. So we can simply put them in one place and process them using such models, augmented intelligence, which is somewhat in contrast to artificial intelligence, even though we're talking about the same thing. I really like the comparison of Terminator with Iron Man. So we have this artificial intelligence that wants to take over the world on one hand, but we also have this artificial intelligence that helps us fight evil. And here, augmented intelligence is what doesn't take our jobs away, but helps us in our work. I am generally an advocate of thinking about AI as something that is meant to help us in our daily work. And, for example, looking at everyday tasks, it really helps programmers, it really helps analysts. I think that in the future, it will also be the first step towards optimizing efficiency, for example, in the healthcare system, so that a doctor doesn't have to look at every image, but only those where there is no doubt, thanks to some machine and virtual assistants, which I have already mentioned. There's also the matter of AI-supported BI, which was at the very bottom of the table. Here we can talk about two aspects, AI for analysts and engineers, and AI for the business. And now, as data analysts and engineers, we can use AI to support us in data exploration, which I will demonstrate shortly. AI writes documentation very well, truly. And that's quite a tedious task. About what? It helps maintain data governance quality, optimizes data models, and can assist in creating visualizations. When it comes to AI for business, it's essentially access to an analyst 24/7, meaning our director no longer needs to write to us. He also doesn't have to manually click through the dashboard himself. He can just say, listen, prepare me information about what the sales were in the last 3 months, and it will prepare it for him. Additionally, it will generate a presentation on the topic, and it can even generate conclusions about what essentially happened underneath. But here again, one must remember garbage in, garbage out. If we have a good model and everything is well prepared, then in such an ideal world, it will work well, generating simple trends. However, it does not yet implement complex predictive models on its own. But when it comes to simply extending a line on a graph, it handles that well. And now, regarding the demo, let's imagine. Just a second, I'll try to move it to... Oh, I'm slowly managing it. Where are you? Okay. Let's imagine we're running an Italian restaurant, and I don't know, does anyone know Italian? Yes. Great. So definitely, Bartek, in that case, you know that the restaurant is called Data-Driven Restaurant? And now, the restaurant owner has a simple dashboard for his own use with information about what reviews users are giving him on Google. And he noticed that over the past few weeks, these reviews have been getting worse. And he basically started wondering why. He thought that maybe someone bought the competition, bought some bots that are simply leaving bad reviews. But it turns out that no, the weekly number of reviews hasn't significantly increased. However, the average reviews have worsened. So he asked his friendly analyst to tell him what actually happened with this data, if he could take a look. And the analyst looks at the data and says, no, damn. I don't feel like working with text like this. And in BigQuery, because this was actually in BigQuery, there is the possibility of using Gemini, which is Google's Gen AI, to assist with your work. And the analyst decided that in that case he would ask Gemini for help. And the analyst asked, listen, divide these opinions for me, first by context, whether they are negative or positive. And second, what category does this opinion pertain to? And he provided 5 categories that interested him. And he received results like this. We divided it into 5 categories, namely food quality, atmosphere, service quality, price, and portion size. And we immediately see that when it comes to negative opinions, the number of negative opinions regarding food quality has definitely increased. Is this a conclusion we can already act upon? Well, it would be worth investigating further because, yes, the decline in food quality could result from many factors. Therefore, again, we dig deeper. We ask Gemini to tell us to divide it into 5 subcategories, with 1 category being other miscellaneous. And besides that, we have categories such as overall quality, cheese quality, taste, and the preparation process. Regarding these negative reviews, we can notice that among those that increased, namely the quality of the food, the negative reviews concerning the quality of the cheese increased the most. With such an opinion, with such With such help, it seems to me that we can already do something, because we now know specifically what this negative aspect concerns. Why do our customers leave negative reviews? And we can also see that indeed the recent reviews about the cheese were quite negative. Of course, the next natural step is that if it was useful to us once, it will probably be useful again someday. So it's good to automate something like this and check such a dashboard daily. Why am I even talking about these dashboards? Because now is a good time to remove it from here. Just a second. Well, because I allowed myself to divide. It was done because the dividers were so permissive, the organization into three types. We have instinctive organizations. I think the name is self-explanatory, analytical, and data-driven. And now, using as an example those digital native organizations that Kamil mentioned at the beginning, I have dealt with many such clients, and indeed among them. For instance, to give an example. Let's imagine a mobile game developer who has these games, even has several of them. They are doing well. Everything is okay. They are in the black. Everything is great. However, we don't really want to introduce changes there. We would like things to be better, but it's known that the more ads there are, the fewer users will play, because ads are a bit off-putting, and that's how we earn money. But for example, if we lose 5% of users, if the remaining 95% each earn 20% more, is that a bad business decision for us? Well, no. But instinctively, we don't want to implement it because we want as many users as possible to use our services. The second group, which seems to me to be the largest, consists of analytical organizations, meaning those that already use this data daily to make decisions. For example, still staying with these digital natives, we measure LTV, predict LTV, we know how much we spent on specific marketing campaigns, we know how much users will bring us in the long term, return, and thanks to this, we can optimize our spending on campaigns. And this is quite a standard need of these companies, which can of course also be applied to other sectors. And here is also the aspect of forecasting, so that we can make these decisions immediately. We don't have to wait 120 days to see what happened with the users acquired from a given campaign. Instead, we know right away how these users will perform in the future. And data-driven are those, it's actually a small group of such people that we have dealt with. In these organizations, the data is essentially used continuously. With the client I had the opportunity to work with, it looked like they basically sat down to the dashboards in the morning. Based on these dashboards, they made some decisions. God forbid, if something was wrong with the data, we would find out immediately. We had to sit down and fix it right away, make some changes. And not only did they make all these decisions based on the data, but they also used these forecasts or this data in processes. For example, when it came to predicting cash flow to avoid losing financial liquidity, we can't spend too much money, and by knowing how much we will spend in the sense of how much we will earn, based on these forecasts, we will know what our financial status is. We know when money from a vendor is coming into our account, and thanks to this, we won't lose financial liquidity. And they had this automated based on these forecasts. And I think this is what data-driven bitchy businesses should strive for. In fact, all businesses should aim to rely on data to such an extent. And I actually have a question for you. And once again, it will be on Menti. What is your organization like? Is it instinctive, analytical, or data-driven? Okay, I actually expected a more normal distribution, to be honest, but I see it's a a bit skewed. In essence, this doesn't surprise me in the sense that most organizations are analytical because, as I mentioned, this is also the largest group of our clients with whom we work. And it seems that this is exactly what's happening in the market. However, I must admit I'm a bit surprised by the left side here. But it's good that you are interested in using data, and I think it's a good step to move further to the right.
I would ask a question.
So I'll start from the right side, regarding the data-driven aspect. It was a startup, in the sense that when we started collaborating, it was essentially a startup. And during the time we worked together, to be honest, because I'm not entirely sure. Yes, they started with a few people, and now there are probably around several dozen. But just to shed some light on how beneficial it is to use this data, over the few years of collaboration, they increased their marketing expenses probably 1,000-fold, in the sense that and their revenues too, yes, of course. So that's what this data gives us. When it comes to analytics, these are organizations of all sizes, from the smallest to the largest. There's also the issue that often it's not the entire organization that is analytical, but rather one department might be more analytical, while another operates more instinctively. However, generally speaking, when it comes to analytics, as for instinctive ones, here, well, these will also be either medium or large organizations. But a specific division, or indeed the smallest ones that are just beginning their journey with data. Are there any more questions? If there aren't any now, again, if they come up in the future, feel free to contact me. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Lukasz.